Hi, students. I wanted to go over some of the theory that people expressed concern about from chapter 7 from last semester. And some of this stuff, really, there's the only way to remember it fully is to memorize it. So it's okay to have instinct to memorize these things. And these are theories that you would look back on when you're practicing as a social worker to remind you of some of these things. Again, a lot of these theories have been questioned, or there's some skepticism about them, but we're still learning them as sort of groundbreaking early on theory about development. So Erikson's psychosocial theory really is a lot of getting to be better at building relationships and understanding a person's role in society, right? So if you think about that as a child develops, they're trying to create strong relationships, and they're trying to create a strong personality within the larger social structure. So stage 1, which is really to when a child is roughly a year and a half, so from birth to a year and a half, is really, it's called basic trust versus basic mistrust. And this is just realizing that there's someone there for you as you start to explore your environment. So you'll see little ones, crying to get a response, to have someone come and help. So if a baby is aware that someone's going to come when they're distressed, this helps to build trust. Or as they become more mobile, breaking away and being able to come back to the trusted person as they explore. So they don't tend to go too far away, or they love to watch you chase after them, and you'll watch them sort of look back at you like, are you going to come after me? Right. Stage 2 is autonomy versus shame and doubt, and this is from that year and a half to 3-year-olds, and this is when kids start to be able to do things independently and feel really good about that independence. So, potty training, being able to dress, feed themselves becomes, major accomplishments. In families where there's too much punishment, or there's not a lot of recognizing some of that independence or autonomy, that will lead to shame and doubt. And so Erikson would say that if that were the case, then because these are stages, it would make it hard for the child to meet the demands of the next stage of development. Initiative versus guilt, which is stage 3, and this is for kids that are age 3 to 6. This is when they get really active physically and they take initiative. So again, this is, just increased independence, really getting to explore more of their environment and being able to be away without constantly sort of needing an adult or a caregiver nearby. So not feeling like you have to go back to the caregiver all the time to feel a sense of security. Like there's a real thought that, I can explore and have a sense of what's safe because I've been taught about those things. And so just a little bit more time away and the ability to be independent. Again, if things are too restricted and too rigid, kids have a hard time growing to the next stage. So stage 4 is industry versus inferiority, and this is 6 to 12 years old. This is when school is super important, succeeding at school, hobbies, sports, things outside of school where they have feelings of accomplishment. Peers start to become very, very important. And so parents are still very important in this stage. So the parents are sort of there for feelings of accomplishment. The peer relationships are to have feelings of more independence, right? So that they can make decisions, with people their own age. Again, if there's not accomplishment or there's frustration or there isn't a place for accomplishment in a child's life, it can lead to feelings of inferiority that lead to, early depression, things like that. Stage 5, identity versus role confusion. We spent a lot of time on identity formation in the first semester. So adolescence and young adulthood is really deciding, what kind of adult I want to be. What kind of person. This is where, like, moral development, where kids are starting to really decide what's important to them, not following the rules as closely, taking risks, and really feeling a sense of self that might be different from their parents, different from their friends. And if that doesn't go well, then it causes a crisis. Again, you guys are starting to learn about young adulthood and middle adulthood, and there's all kinds of places where there can be a crisis, right? And this is just one of them. Stage 6 is intimacy versus isolation, and this is when people start to couple up, start to build families. Again, the way our society is structured, some of that's really changing. But being able to be in a loving relationship and not lose yourself, having independence, accomplishment, all the things from the previous stages, but being able to share emotional sort of stability with another person. And then stage 7 is generativity versus stagnation. And this is when people start reflecting on their life and realizing that they have things to give, not only to their family, but to the greater society. And if they're able to accomplish that or have ways to express that, they tend to do okay. If not, there's a feeling of stagnation, that their life is routine and not really contributing to the larger community. And again, this can cause a crisis. Stage 8 is ego integrity versus despair. And this is when you look back on your life and feel like you had a great life. You did what you were supposed to do. You made contributions. You helped not only did you do what you needed to do to develop, but you helped raise children to develop properly. And then that you were able to contribute to society on some level, and feeling pretty good about it. Ready to, feeling ready to die, ready to be feeling pretty satisfied that you lived a good life. Okay, so again, in each of those stages, if a person doesn't feel like they were able to sort of maneuver that developmental stage, it causes crises, and then those crises follow them throughout their growing up. And then that can cause mental health problems or relationship problems, isolation, depression, those kinds of things. So that's what that's all about. I'm trying to see what other theories you guys had questions about. In the identity formation theories, there was discussion Cooley's theories of identity formation and the looking glass self. And this is when at younger ages people look to others to sort of define themselves. So they look into a mirror, the mirror being society, and they decide, if they're doing okay or not from the reactions of other people. Over time, though, this isn't as necessary. You are able to see value in yourself without feedback from the society, right? So you're able to sort of come up with your own rules. And again, this falls very closely with the moral development theory that you guys learned, right? So people that are at a higher place of being able to make decisions are aware of sort of the gray areas, that things aren't black and white, that the rules that we have don't always fit situations, and that as a society, as we progress and change, the rules shift. So you feel like you're in a position to say, well, I can change the rules, right? As opposed to I have to follow them very closely. The problem with looking glass self, or some of the theory of people on the margins, is that looking to society for your identity is that a lot of groups are seen as inferior by society. So when you're being told that you're bad or you're not good enough because you're a woman, or because you're African American, or you're gay, that makes it very hard because it impacts your self-esteem at a young age. It's much harder to overcome those voices to create your own identity. And there are theorists who are so much better at discussing this in terms of non-white male people. Gloria Anzaldúa, I would say, is really helpful in saying that this can be really hard to realize that the mirror that you've been looking in is not true, and that it's actually harmful. So really having to create a completely different way to assess who you are and assess your strengths and what you can contribute to society. Because if you listen to those naysayers, or the way that society is set up to make you feel inferior, then you'll just continue in adulthood to feel inferior, which is not empowering in any way. And it helps, as a tool of oppression. It keeps people down purposely. So that's sort of how the book tries to bring some of the criticism of developmental theorists like Erikson. And then Marcia's categories of identity brings this even further, right? Making it clear how the process of having to sort of combat societal BS about people on the margins, and some of that is admitting to there has to be some anger on the part of a person who is creating their own identity. They often feel angry about what the larger society has to say about them, but also about the memberships that they're in. So not everything's positive about the marginalized communities too. Sometimes they buy into the larger societal understandings of inferiority, but also there's usually some rules from the larger societies, so they co-opt some of the oppression, and so that's what this really talks about. I'm trying to see. All right. So the book is saying that Marcia's theories are being, questioned by folks like Hamilton and Fraser. And they talk about there being this sort of time of conformity, that they follow the rules, and they follow the rules not only of the larger society, but also the rules of the marginalized community that they're from. And then there's a point where they discover that some of those rules have been put in place and they actually disadvantage them and are not true. And then from there's resistance, where they get angry. And this is where they often start to have a better sense of their marginalized community culture. So instead of, most public schools tend to teach about the dominant culture's history, heroes, battles, and different things that really only pertain to, say, white Christian culture. And this is a time where when people are forming their identity and they're on the margins, that they learn more about their culture. And then there's a part where they start to handpick things from the larger culture and from their own culture that they like, but they also have to go through this sort of moment of reckoning of, there's not everything isn't good and bad. There's a lot of things that some people find good about those different groups, and there's things that people find bad. So it's as you start selecting, how do I want to live my life? How do I best understand the larger oppressive culture, but also my own sort of marginalized culture and how it can also play a part in oppression. And then becoming aware of how you want to sort of decide on these rules. Again, this is really close to what you guys learn about Kohlberg and Gilligan's moral development. So Kohlberg has been criticized by Carol Gilligan in particular of only watching little boys when coming up with his moral decision-making developmental things. And so, again, this isn't much different than Freud, too. I mean, this is very much informed by Freud. So at first, we sort of make decisions based on our id. Like, this feels good, so I'm going to do it. That's what little kids do, right? When they're really, really little. Then they learn rules, and there's a lot of hammering rules at them, which is the superego, right? And so for a while, they're very influenced by rules. Their parents, their school rules, and they listen very carefully to those. Then, over time, they start to push up against those rules and really find their ego, which is the negotiation of the superego and the id, right? So they don't, every desire they have, they don't necessarily satisfy that desire, but they also don't listen always to the rules, so they negotiate in between there. So really, Kohlberg's looking at how they negotiate decisions about relationships, how they follow rules, and there's some gender differences in how that happens. Now, Kohlberg saw gender differences in women, little girls, and he saw that as inferior moral development. Gilligan argued that girls are constructed, or they're encouraged to have different values, which in part are relationship values. So boys tend to follow the rules, and girls will often make decisions based on a relationship. They'll put relationship over rules. Now, this is a generalization. There are some boys that tend to follow relationships over, and there's also different culture. There are cultural differences. There are cultures that emphasize relationship over rules. And Both those theories are really just looking at the United States, which is a very different sort of moral space than, say, India or Japan, right? So Gilligan talked about how, well, girls are making these moral decisions based on the people they love and what's best for the people they love versus the rule that sometimes the rules really go against relationships. So again, Erikson's stages are about relationships in society. Even Freud is about relationships in society. And your drives, right? Your just natural drives for procreation, for survival, that sort of are interspersed in between all these theories, right? So just, Gilligan is considered a feminist because she's questioning Kohlberg's theories as only pertaining to males. Now, lots of people, including the sort of answer to Marcia's stuff, Hamilton and Fraser, are critiques of Erikson as well, right? That it doesn't really make sense for people who are on the margins, so families where there are two moms or two dads, or families of color, that they have very different lived experiences, so that means that they make decisions differently because of the importance of relationships in those communities, but also the rules are often against them, right? So they're set up to advantage a particular group of people. So their negotiation of the rules are different. I don't know if I'm making it more confusing or making it better for you guys. So I think it's important to get, and so also what's similar across these theories is that as people get older, they're able to sometimes go against the rules. They're able to see the gray, the complexity of the world around them. And so decisions aren't as easy. When you're younger, you see things as sort of black and white. It's much easier to make decisions because they actually feel there's only one right answer. And so when you're working with clients, you'll notice that people that are very rigid and believe that there's only one right way, that can cause crisis, because in reality there are multiple ways to go about things. And this is what we think about as ethical decision making too. And as clinicians, it's better to see the world as gray, that you might have the way you would go, but that isn't the only way to go, that there are usually multiple paths that are equally good, and that each person has to sort of come up with what's good for them. And a lot of that is influenced by their worldview, their lived experience. And so what would be good for me might not be good for anybody else. It just works for me. So for us as social workers, we have to learn to respect that other people have other things influencing their decisions. And all you can do is try to work beside them to better understand sort of how they're making decisions, to make sure they're aware of the consequences of their decisions, and to talk about the rules and what the rules mean to them and what relationships mean to them. So I think that's why these theories are still taught. Even the theories on faith development are very similar, right? That you have to sort of meet a certain obstacle in your work with understanding society and other people, and that the older you are and the more experience you have, the wiser you are. And the wiser you are, the more you realize you don't really know. So what's sad is maybe that things get a little more confusing. But anytime there's confusion in life, people will have a crisis. It will feel emotionally difficult. You'll feel disoriented and scared, because whatever way that you had been making decisions and how you were negotiating your world changes, and it feels very scary. But usually that's very temporary, that people will learn a way to cope. And most humans are incredibly resilient. They meet a crisis, they look at how they've coped with other crises. But it's also just good for people to know, and for social workers to know, that crisis is a normal part of life. It's a normal part of development. The social justice aspect of all of this is that sometimes it's society that causes these conflicts. That if society wasn't oppressive and problematic, people wouldn't have as many crises, right? And so part of our job as social workers is try to change some of those structures that cause people to go into crisis. And the truth is that any group that's oppressed faces more crises than groups that are not oppressed, which is exhausting, has health impacts, right? If you have to constantly go through crisis because society's created these crises, then you're going to be more tired, more grumpy, and you'll have more moments where you realize that you have to fight harder, or you have to surround yourself with supportive people because the larger group isn't supportive, right? So there's a lot of moments of realization of injustice, which causes anger and sadness and depression, right? So I hope that's helpful. And again, just memorizing the names of the stages and how many stages there are, the only way I can think of to do that is to just memorize them. And all of them will most likely show up on your licensure exam. So there's no getting around it. I think for me, those things are helpful clinically, so that I know when someone's sort of falling out of the norm, and that might need extra support, but also might need me to advocate for them, because the way we perceive normal is socially constructed. And so I might have to fight and say, yes, they're not falling within this norm, but maybe this norm is not good for them because of the community that they're a part of. This structure is put in place to disadvantage them. And so it's a space to think about how you can advocate for others. And again, if you guys have questions, please feel free. I'll put a discussion post area for anybody that has questions or needs clarification. Alrighty, everyone's doing so well already. The introductions are awesome. The discussions that you guys are, or the individual posts that you're doing about midlife crisis or middle-age sexuality are very good. Hopefully I've structured this semester so it's not so stressful, and I'm feeling less stressed, so I hope you guys are. And again, I appreciate everyone's patience as for me to learn how to best do this kind of class online. Okay, so thank you guys for teaching me about how to do that better this semester. All right, bye-bye.